This is November 17th, another update on our election saga here. So quickly go through a few things. Lots happened. It looks like the Georgia hand recount is kind of coming to a close, and it looks like we have discovered an incident in which there was some undercount of votes. And it looks like that's about 800 votes favorable to Trump, which should pull it down from 14,000 something other into the, I guess, the 13s. Obviously not enough to save the day, but but it is another incident. They apparently this one is being attributed to human error, just like our famous HL 9000 computer in 2001: A Space Odyssey. But apparently it was a case where the person in charge didn't come in that day, and somebody that was improperly trained failed to actually upload the data that would have given the 2,600 votes, which gives a net advantage to Trump of 800. So, but it looks like that the issues that Sidney Powell raised haven't showed up in the Georgia count, which was, an interesting question, because the whole theme that's kind of shifted on this thing, which I think is partly the direction a lot of this has gone, has been the idea that discovery that the origin of a lot of software used in various instances came out of Venezuela, and was originally designed to allow them to cheat. And I suppose you may have seen some of her presentations elsewhere. I might put a link to one of them here in the description below, so that you can see it if you haven't seen it already. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that technique, even if the software allowed it, was actually utilized in a U.S. election. I don't know if that's been proven yet, that it was actually turned on or used. It simply would be a feature of the system that might be used. And of course, that alone would be reason, in my opinion, to reject the system. The fact that anything that makes massive fraud possible doesn't sound like the sort of thing that should be in a system we're actually using. And of course, we've all been kind of waiting for this data to be presented in some way in which it can be used. And this has to do, I think, originally with a system from Smartmatic. Now, I'm not sure exactly, how that goes into Dominion. Did the Smartmatic history get somehow subcontracted in Dominion? I'm still waiting to see the exact details on that. And there's been also problems with Dominion machines along a similar level, and of course they were rejected for use in Texas, but they've been used in a lot of other places. So I think what we're waiting for here potentially is, I kind of had a doubt up front that they would find a lot in Georgia, because I think what happened in Georgia more than anything else was the fact that the Trump campaign, it doesn't necessarily mean President Trump himself personally, but the campaign pollsters and apparently just underestimated the threat in Georgia, I think. I mean, if you look at all the places they campaigned heavily, I think they made maybe 2 stops total in Georgia, one early and one right at the end. But other than that, they really didn't campaign much in Georgia, and obviously there was a tremendous amount of campaigning in Florida, which they won fairly handily. And they did okay in North Carolina, but obviously that was a serious enough problem that needed to be focused on. And Arizona, apparently, is a similar case where we kind of came in a little low so far. I mean, all this is based on the official counts and not any potential recounts or investigations that might go forward if you could get a court to order it. But I'm speaking here to the numbers that have actually been counted by the system as it is. And so that's a bit of a problem there. The lawsuit in Pennsylvania is an interesting one, which has the potential of actually turning the Pennsylvania around if the courts would have the what do you want to say it, courage to make that decision. I mean, I think it's a proper decision, and probably in a municipal election or something, they probably would make it. But in the presidential level, I think it's a bit. We'll just see what they do. I'm a little bit lacking in confidence the courts will have the courage to do what they ought to do. We've already seen the situation with that just come out at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is almost totally partisan. It's a 5 Democrats to 2 Republicans court, and the Democrats vote as Democrats, so you can see what's going to happen there. This whole problem was started largely by one of their decisions. And they should be considered to be a completely biased player in the game, so to speak. But the real issue to test out the Sidney Powell, what we call it, theory or hypothesis, claim, whatever word you want to use, I think is a full recount of Wisconsin, because that's where there was an example where at a single point in time the vote simply flipped from a vote that was heading toward a Republican victory to one that headed toward a Democrat or Biden victory. And so I think a full recount of that might reveal the operation of the system. I'm skeptical of the claim that gigantic numbers of votes were changed this way, only because of a lot of factors. For one thing, when you do things with gigantic numbers of votes, it seems to me like you raise the possibility of detection a lot higher. And if you're the Democrat operative in this hypothetical scenario we're talking about, you don't need to do that. All you need to do is change just enough to win comfortably and avoid it getting, hopefully avoid a recount. You want to be credible, not absurd. And so I think it's possible that you might discover something in the Wisconsin case. And I understand it costs something like $8 million to do it. But if the Trump campaign wants to continue this effort, I think that's one we should go ahead and recount and see what happens, because it's it might reveal the kind of thing they're talking about. And the other one, of course, would be Michigan, but the problem there is getting a recount. As I recall from previous history, I think that the recount criteria in Michigan is much more demanding, like something like 0.25% or something like that. And obviously, none of the races we're really seriously interested in here are within 0.25%. So, and that would either be the Senate race with John James, or of course, the biggest one is the Trump race. But that one is so far off, 150,000, that it's going to be very hard to do anything with it. But the truth is, unless the only way there would be the allegations of fraud. But you'd need to have a hand recount of certainly the Detroit area to actually get an analysis to see were there very large numbers of votes that simply had Biden on it and nothing else. That would be a signature of fraud, in my opinion. If there was a tremendous number of votes like that, along with eyewitness testimony to the effect that these were brought in kind of during a lull in voting, which these stand downs and counting that occurred at very odd times during this process are very suspect. And so that would be a way to try to get a handle on that. But again, can we get a court that will order that? That's ongoing. The problem has been this attitude is we really don't want to see this on the part of courts. We don't want to know, basically, so we're not going to look. And perhaps we don't believe it really happened. I will say one thing, listening to Rush Limbaugh today, that Sidney Powell has really put her credibility on the line here with the things she's saying. I mean, if she's right, it's absolute dynamite. There's no doubt about that. And if she can prove this. But it's because, of course, if this was true, that what she's saying, that massive amounts of votes across the whole country were shifted for various purposes, this would kind of tend to upend the whole election in some ways. Not just the one specific state counts that we're talking about. So that's kind of where we are on that, and we're waiting for the Kraken to come out. I mean, she has come up with testimony from one witness that showed how the Smartmatic system was designed for election fraud and was used in foreign countries for that purpose. Another issue would be to show that, in fact, that mechanism exists in the systems used in the U.S. and that it was activated. And that's probably requires additional eyewitness testimony and maybe technical analysis. And again, the clock is running. That's the problem I see is, can we get a suitable outcome in the time available. If this was a House race, I think you might very well, prevent certification, and this could go on for a few months, and we could end up overturning it and maybe have a new votes in certain states. I think that's certainly possible. But in a presidential race with the imperative on the presidency, it gets a little trickier. And some of the outcomes that can occur are not necessarily positive either. I mean, when you get into the question of, for instance, if the Congress gets into the way of asserting who the electors are, that can be a problem, particularly if there's different mechanisms that can come into play in different scenarios. And in fact, I've had a little bit of pushback on one of the things I've raised, because in terms of the issue of when it goes to the House is kind of an interesting issue. That I had read it as, when they said the electors appointed, I thought they meant that, okay, you're appointed to have one elector for every representative and Senate that each jurisdiction has, okay, each state, and of course the 3 for that are arbitrarily put in for DC. But the argument back was, no, it only is if it's literally a tie. And that, of course, if you have a 3-way race where you have 3 parties that get electoral votes, something like the 1968 race, for instance, then you could have a situation where if somebody didn't get an actual majority of all of them, they would go to the House. Or in a situation where there's only 2 parties getting electors, it would have to literally be a tie. So it all gets on the question of what the definition of appointed is, and the only case in history where it really happened was the 1824 election, and in that case, there wasn't a problem with that. I believe everybody had electors, and it was 4 candidates, and nobody had a majority, and so forth, went to Congress. So that, that's a real tight legal point, and in fact, it could be up to the Supreme Court to interpret it. I don't know that it's ever really happened before. That is, if you could fail to get certification to 270 on the part of Biden, and then would it really be just the majority of those that voted? In which case Biden would probably might still get it, or maybe theoretically even Trump if he turned over a state or two. But see what I'm saying? Or, okay, that's another issue which is out there, and it could very well be an arbitrary decision that the Supreme Court would end up making too. I mean, I don't know that the case it's ever happened before, and when you're dealing with sort of the way those old documents are written, I mean, look what the left does with the Second Amendment. This is for years the left was maintaining it only indicates the state has the right to maintain militias, not that individuals have a right to keep and bear arms. So you could see how that could come into a court decision potentially if it happened. But right now there's no evidence that's going to really happen. The push right now is to get certification by the deadlines, and given that, we're really up against the wall trying to get any of these things stopped. The Pennsylvania perhaps has the clearest case because it doesn't involve actual counts or even this whole argument about the voting software type issues. There it's simply a question of how the votes were counted and were observers allowed. And there's one outcome which probably won't make us all happy, but could happen. I would commend to the Supreme Court, if it gets there, would be to rule in favor of Trump and throw out those 600,000 or whatever it is ballots, which would give the state to Trump, but wouldn't actually give the election to Trump. That is, unless he can overturn other states, it would still go to Biden with 286 electoral votes, but it would also punish the Democrat Party of Pennsylvania for what they did, and be a shot across the bow to other states in the future and localities not to do things like that. I mean, it's even that might be at least a moral victory for us to show that yes, they really did try to do wrong things here and they got slapped down for it, but maybe it doesn't change the election, because it looks like the recount in Georgia is not going to change the election at this point in any meaningful way. And at this point, we seem to be having trouble getting anything going in Arizona, given the nature of their state laws, I believe. Then there is a positive development in Nevada, in which a local election has got turned over already, but it doesn't really directly affect the presidential election, but it does set a precedent that if one of them was invalid and it was done on the same ballot, then wasn't the other one potentially invalid too? And that would get into the devil in the details, such as exactly what was the difference in vote and and so forth. That could come into play. But even if you got it, it's only 6 more votes, and that would still leave Biden with 280 as it stands right now, unless you, for instance, could get a recount successful in Wisconsin. So it looks like pursuing Nevada and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania at the moment are the most productive areas, as well as lawsuits about Michigan, which sounds to be a tougher nut to crack, but it might actually yield more evidence of fraud, potentially. Because again, the software manipulation that Sidney Powell's talking about quite well might have been done there, if it was done anywhere. I see that's the whole point. I mean, I'm not sure what evidence she really has at this point, other than that the systems originally in Venezuela and foreign countries were used to cheat. But can we prove it was really used to cheat here? And so I think it is a big recommendation against using those software systems in future elections. I think that for the moment, it's still going to be tough to get a court to actually overturn the presidential election here. But at any rate, we're still in the fight, and we'll see what happens. I think, if nothing else, I still see the value in pursuing this to gain as much evidence of malfeasance as possible. Because, there definitely was quite a bit of it, I think. And of course, the chinning bars to prove it really was decisive. There's also, of course, a lot of statistical anomalies that have been cited where the proportionality of voting just didn't match what makes sense in a lot of different districts. And I'm not going to address that today. I've heard about it, and I don't have the details enough to get into it, but it does sound another interesting area to pursue for a future discussion. And that is, another area of action. But again, will the courts actually bite on it? And so far, the courts have been very reluctant to get into this, as we can see. Well, I'm going to bring this to a close for now. Again, if you like these videos, give me a like, and if you're on YouTube, subscribe to my channel, and we'll try to keep on providing the information that comes, as well as in the future other topics. So that will be it for today. Signing out.